So we see that the response to these grave heresies were people ceasing communion with the people who were preaching the heresy. And in fact, as I mentioned, in 1924, when the calendar was changed, about 25% of the people in Greece did not go along with this change. No bishops at the time were with them, though, so they were served by priest monks from Mount Athos. As we see in the life of St. Maximus, Rome for a time was still Orthodox. There were still places, pockets, that were Orthodox. So likewise, even though all the bishops in Greece went along with the new calendar, there were bishops in other places that were Orthodox, like the Russian Church. And in fact, the Russian Church would begin its great martyrdom. So the Church always exists on earth at all times, but in any given area it might cease to exist. And we know this also, unfortunately, for North Africa, where all of North Africa was Christian, and the Muslims came and wiped out that civilization. And to this day, there are no Christians hardly left in Tunisia and Morocco. All those people were Christians, and that church is gone. Other churches survived, like the Orthodox Church under Turkish dominion, of course because they kept the true faith, but also because of repentance. People like St. Cosmas the Aetolian. All of the northern Greece was about, Albania is now, 70% Muslim. Northern Greece would have ended up the same way if not for St. Cosmas, who went around and taught people the true faith, baptized people that were not being baptized because there weren't enough priests, made schools, got priests ordained. He forestalled all those people being led away into Islam. So anyways, but for God's grace, there are people that are raised up to follow God's commands, to follow, and God gives them the grace to do wonderful things. So 11 years go by in Greece, 1924 to 1935. At that time, there were bishops that were trying to get the old calendar back. In fact, Bishop Germanos of Demetrius didn't even allow the new calendar in his diocese until 1929. Then the synod forced him. And they were having talks. They were thinking, maybe we can get the calendar changed back. Unfortunately, they came to conclude it was not going to happen. So 11 bishops decided that they were going to return back to the old calendar because it was too long to wait. There's all these people, 25% of Greece, that are on the old calendar, no bishops, we need to go back. So they made their intention to go back. The government of Greece, the Kingdom of Greece, immediately sent them notice that if they did that, they were toast. So 8 of the 11 bishops said, second thought, we'll just keep fighting for a return to the old calendar without separating. 3 bishops, though, separated from the synod at that time, returned to the old calendar. They refused to commune with these people who, through many efforts, patiently had been attempted to be persuaded, but did not, ultimately refused. So they realized the time had come for there not to be communion. And they returned to the old calendar, and they ordained 4 other bishops, and these 7 bishops formed the Synod of the True Orthodox Christians of Greece. Why did they call themselves True Orthodox? Well, they had to go register the church. The name, the Orthodox Church of Greece, was taken, so, they had to distinguish their church. So they were the non-innovators. They were called, though, by the new calendar church, the old calendarists, in Greek, paleo-imerologites, like the old-fashioned people, you old fogies on your old calendar. But they call themselves Ecclesia ton Nision Orthodoxon Christianon, the Church of the True Orthodox Christians, because they never went to the new calendar. These bishops took up the leadership of the church, and immediately they were persecuted. Some of them were exiled. To make a long story short, because we're unfortunately drawing short on time here, because I could, believe me, go on all night about this topic, and I know we have to draw it to a close at some point. They ordained priests. They went around and organized. Over time, though, the persecution of the old calendarists, the True Orthodox Christians, continued. People were denied admission to schools. Churches were shut down. One example, a new calendar bishop came in and took the Holy Eucharist and dumped it out and said, "This is not communion," and stomped on the chalice, which we have in our basement of our cathedral in Athens as a monument to what happened, a testimony. The chalice with a big footprint in it from the bishop stomping on it. I'm sorry, but I wouldn't probably stomp on Roman Catholic communion if even if I don't think the Roman Catholic Church is a church, I wouldn't go into a Roman Catholic church, take their host and just throw it on the ground. I mean, that's just probably not really a great thing to do. Yet they wanted to kind of say, hey, take that. Or they took priests, And they shaved their beard and threw off their raso and put them in regular clothes and threw them out on the street. One guy we have in Chicago, he died last year. He was in his 90s. They took him to the basement of the police department in Athens. They took a meat hook, they turned him upside down and attached him with a rope to the meat hook and left him hanging upside down for like a week in the basement of the archdiocese, I mean the police station, sorry. It happened that in both the basement of the archdiocese and of the police station that people were interrogated and shorn, Old Calendar's priests, depending on what happened where. But this guy was hung upside down. Old Calendar's, the Metropolitan Chrysostomos of Florina, who was 81, was sent to a monastery on the side of a mountain that was very harsh conditions so that he wouldn't consecrate more bishops. And a lot of people seeing this persecution, including two of the bishops that were consecrated, went back to the new calendar because they were afraid of these persecutions. So the Old Calendar Church became a little smaller, suffered persecutions. It also suffered a division because seeing these grave persecutions that were going on, some of the people said, there is no way that there is any sense that these people are still in any way Orthodox, and we just think that they are totally outside the church, and there's no way that we can say that they have any grace from God. And other people in the Old Calendar Church, while they had agreed in principle that the new calendars had left the church and were schismatic and had no grace, they saw that there were still people in the New Calendar Church that wanted to come back to the Old Calendar, and so they privately made the opinion that, well, maybe that it hasn't fully gone into effect, the anathema. Maybe there's still grace in the New Calendar Church. So this division happened, and instead of just having it be a matter of private debate, the one party, the Matthewites, separated from the other bishops and said, we're going to be away from you because you're too soft on the new calendars. Well, to make a long story short, through several more years, seeing that the persecution was not going to abet, seeing that no one was really coming forward, the Metropolitan Chrysostomos of Florina restated the 1935 encyclical that the New Calendar Church had gone into schism to try to appease the Matthewites and have them be reunited. But by that point, they had made their own bishops. Bishop Matthew consecrated with one himself a bishop, which is uncanonical unless it's a persecution. He argued there was no other bishops. There were other bishops, so, you know, that's a matter of interpretation, of course. But they refused to come back. When he did that, though, the vast majority of his flock came with us, our church, the main Old Calendar Church, because they knew that this was a dead-end street. The Metropolitan Chrysostomos of Florina, even though he was labeled as a vacillator, he changed his positions as he saw the evidence. So in other words, he wanted to try to reach out to the new calendarists. Still, he had hopes that a council would be called, and he felt that it was not the best thing to condemn them outright. But when it became clear that nothing was going to happen and that there was this large group of people that thought that he was too soft, then he did reiterate the encyclical that said that it was not just a potential schism, but that it was an actual schism, and that the grace in the New Calendar Church had departed. Now, does that mean that, of course we have to be clear that the New Calendar Church said the same thing about the Old Calendars first, and obviously they come into the church and they dump out the Holy Communion. So, theologically, this is where the break, it became pretty much a permanent break. So from that point, things continue to get worse as we see from ecumenism. The Old Calendar Church, then their last bishop died, Metropolitan Chrysostomos of Florina. He had not consecrated new bishops, partly because he was in despair about this whole situation. That first of all, the New Calendar Church was still, after all these years, even getting worse. And that a group, although at this point it had become small, a minority of Old Calendarists were so intransigent that they would not even commune with him because he had privately speculated that they were still part of the church. And so he became very disgusted and despaired of this, and he died before other bishops could be consecrated. Well, we know that a church cannot exist without bishops. So the Old Calendar Christians of Greece appealed to other churches that were not participating in ecumenism, not on the New Calendar, namely the Russian Orthodox Church outside Russia. That church which had fled communism from Russia and had set up in the United States and Western Europe. they got a situation where they came, Archimandrite Akakios came from Greece, and he was consecrated a bishop by 2 bishops of the Russian Church abroad. And then 2 years later, after he went back to Greece, another bishop from the Russian Church abroad went to Greece with him, and they consecrated the other bishops so that there would be a holy synod for the church in Greece of the Old Calendar. Very interesting story. It was still illegal at that point in the 1960s to be in Old Calendars. Actually illegal. There were still people being arrested. So, Leonti was his name. Leonti, Archbishop Leonti of Chile. He goes to Greece to help. So, whatever, espionage is going on, they receive word that Leonti, an Old Calendar bishop, is here to help the Old Calendars make more bishops. Let's go arrest him. Well, in a very interesting coincidence, there's another Leonti. Leonti of the Metropolia. Now that's called the Orthodox Church in America, the OCA. So Leonti was one of their former metropolitans. Metropolitan Leonti. So Archbishop Leonti and Metropolitan Leonti, these 2 Russians, were staying in basically the same hotel. So the police come to arrest this Leonti because he's about to make bishops with the other Old Calendarists. They get the other one, and our Leonti sneaks out, and in the end makes bishops with Archbishop Akakios. So God protected him, and the other Leonti was detained. And I'm not the one that's here to make bishops for some Greeks. I don't know what you're talking about. So that church continues along. In 1986, our church was finally given legal recognition. The persecution stopped in the 70s, but it finally received legal recognition in 1986 with the new Constitution Amendment. And our church was recognized and given the legal right to conduct marriages and baptisms. And so Greek people that belong to the Old Calendar Church abroad can register their baptisms and marriages with the state of Greece. Now, that doesn't say that the church in Greece of the New Calendar recognizes us, because they don't, but the government does. So for the purposes of being a good Greek citizen and having your marriages and baptisms recognized, the state did recognize that in 1986.